Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, we are going to try that again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
That's better. Thank you so much. My name is Betsy Corcoran. I'm editor and co-founder and CEO and dishwasher and everything else at EdSurge. And we are here to talk about Sesame Street. Steve Youngwood, President, COO of Sesame Street, with some really interesting questions. We heard a panel just now about investing, for-profit, nonprofit. And the question that I have for Steve is, so what's made it work? What's made it work? And ultimately, how much of this could you have done as a nonprofit, as a for-profit? We have just 20 minutes for this conversation. We're going to go super fast, and we will take one or two questions at the end. And of course, questions are questions, not statements. And so I thank you for that in advance. So Steve, let's start with the good stuff. 50 years, congratulations.
Thank you.
So what are you really proud of?
I think it starts that we made it through 50 years. But it's really what's behind it is what we're proud of. And, Joan and Lloyd, I've been there 4 years, so it's hard for me to take any of the credit for it. But Joan and Lloyd started with an idea and a hypothesis and say, let's do an experiment. We know that people were bought into using media to sell beer and to sell cereal.
Right. It was a wasteland, right? Television was a wasteland.
It was a wasteland, and I think their hypothesis, it was clear that it is a teachable medium, and it wasn't a question of if it could teach, it was about what it could teach. And their hypothesis and question is like, can you use media to educate kids as opposed to just sell them products? And I think probably the biggest thing we're proud of is that the experiment worked. And the answer is you can use media and to educate and help kids, and probably in different ways. There is the longitudinal studies that show that people grew up on it, but then there's the kind of the softer stuff, and which one of those surprises of me in the job is you go in the US or around the world, how emotionally the program has touched people and meant different things to different people. Whether it's most recently when we had the Muppet with autism and how tried destigmatizing, to whether it's an HIV Muppet in South Africa. And that has been probably what we are most proud of. And then I sometimes say even the bigger impact, particularly as someone who came from outside the workshop. I've been there 4 years, spent a lot of time at Nickelodeon, is that there is the direct impact, but there's the industry that was created and validated because of it, which is that of educational media and edutainment, whether, different sort of continuums. And that's probably Joan's biggest legacy, is that she created an industry that goes well beyond the show.
Right. What about regrets? When, as you said, you've only been there 4 years, but there's always lore. There are discussions about choices made and choices that were passed by. What do people regret at Sesame?
I think that we try to look forward, so regrets is unfinished business as opposed to things that we haven't done yet. I'd say the most call this a regret or call it's a reason to continue the march, which is that it was started to close the gap, and the gap being defined as kindergarten readiness. And 50 years later, while we believe we've had great impact, and it's proven it's measurable impact, there's still a gap. And so we have not completed the goal. And if that's the one thing people had to scratch their head is as great as the impact we have and it's measurable, clearly there's a lot more work to do. And we got to figure out how to scale our efforts or galvanize other people to scale their efforts even more.
So in the panel that we just heard, we talked about venture, and we heard some of the investors say, yes, we want to have impact. We also heard them say, yeah, we've got to have measurable returns. We've got to make sure that stuff pays off. You said that Sesame, one of the great legacies of Sesame was creating an industry. Mm-hmm. Could that have happened if you'd been a for-profit in the beginning?
I do not believe Sesame would exist if it tried to do it as a for-profit. I mean, if you look at its origins, it was funded by, the beauty of it, not-for-profit doesn't have access to capital markets, but has access to philanthropic markets. And back in 1968, when Joan and Lloyd first started to, pitch their idea, there's nobody who was looking for a financial return that would have even considered it. And they did an efficacy or feasibility study, and they got funding from the Ford Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation, and a little government support. And they sold them on this is a societal issue, and the return is societal. The return is not financial short-term ROI. And so its whole reason for being was enabled by the fact that it was a not-for-profit versus a for-profit. Over time, the core kind of evolved into by being for all kids, even though the reason for being was for the most vulnerable kids. It accidentally became sustainable from commercial efforts and selling toys and t-shirts. But there's no way it would have existed if it was a business plan pitched to venture capitalists, or private equity, or just friends and family.
And talk a little bit about some of the choices. You said it accidentally became sustainable. I actually don't believe that. I don't think anybody accidentally becomes sustainable. So talk a little bit about the kinds of choices that particularly a mission-driven nonprofit has to make on the way to sustainability. What guides those choices? Because let's be frank, there are choices that could have probably made you a lot more money that you chose not to take.
Well, you start with, you say choices, like, I've been in the workshop 4 years, but my history is as a for-profit person. And, the workshop actually made a decision when they brought in first before me, the CEO, and then me like 10 months later, was that, our reason, as media became more pervasive, the mission was as relevant as ever, but the rule book and the game plan to actually succeed in that mission was different, and we needed an outsider perspective as well as a more commercially minded perspective to harness the potential of the not-for-profit. I think I've learned a lot of things. Some things are very similar, which is you got to run a very efficient operation. You in many ways you do need to act commercial if you define commercial as I need to be sustainable. If you define commercial as I need to be disciplined. If you define commercial as that you're in a competitive world and you need a product that has a reason for exist and has a market positioning that has impact. And just because you come with good intentions, that does not give you permission to exist. And I think, and at least some, I'm not gonna say all, some not-for-profits can be, the Kool-Aid of the mission. Well, isn't that good enough? So just give me the money, or why do I need to market myself? Because I'll just sort of pay attention. I always like the biggest example of that is our most philanthropically sort of heartfelt work is in, right now, probably Syria, refugee region, where we're partnering with the IRC. We got $100 million from the MacArthur Foundation to bring early childhood education to Syrian refugees, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. And it's a multifaceted sort of campaign. We've got, with the IRC, on-the-ground service. We've got digital distribution, and then we have mass market with a TV show. The reality of that TV show will only be so successful if they can get 4-year-olds to watch it instead of Paw Patrol, Tom and Jerry, and sort of et cetera. And if you don't come with that commercial mentality, defined as I have competition for people's time, then you're never going to be able to deliver. Joan used to say, if you can't reach, you can't teach. And sometimes you have to take a bit of a commercial headset. And I always hire people who are commercially oriented but mission driven. And it's that sort of balance. I'm not sure that completely answered your original question, but it is a way what we sort of look at it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm going to ask one more question, then I will go to the audience. So if you have 1 or 2 questions, I think we might have a mic, or if you just speak loudly, I'll repeat it either way. So commercially oriented, mission driven, but at the core of it, we've talked about this, there have to be a couple of either standards or principles that ultimately guide the choices you make.
Yep. So we always, and that's probably to me the harder thing about being for a not-for-profit, because we kind of have this imaginary matrix within our organization that sometimes shows up in board presentations. It's like, the things that you do that are financially sustainable, and they're all mission aligned, financially sustainable, and maybe in Nirvana, actually, they generate free cash flow. that you can kind of reinvest in other areas. And the things that you can do fall high on the mission impact. Nirvana is always that upper right-hand corner, which is incredibly high mission impact and actually not only is financially sustainable, but actually gives return. And there are a few things that we are able to do that. Then there are the things that have the strongest mission impact, but there is no financial model. And that is...
What's one example of that?
What is one example of that? There are... I can say what one... There are certainly things, and sustainable means different things. Sustainable can be earned revenue, which is commercial. It can mean sort of philanthropic revenue. Obviously, again, like for example, the $100 million we got for Syria refugee, we just got another $100 million to go help humanitarian efforts in Bangladesh. That was from the Lego Foundation. Those are purely philanthropic. There is no business model there. There is no commercial model. Thank God there is foundations and philanthropies that view it. But 5 years from now, when those grants end, it will be a challenge. Some challenge, the sustainability models. If you prove impact, then you can have faith that funders will come in. In those situations, sometimes you can say if you prove impact, governments may come in. My instinct in those situations that may or may not happen. Or what you can say is like, we're going to self-fund it from excess cash flow if we are so fortunate to have it. The hard thing when you're doing it on, impact is, so when something has a financial return and mission impact, easy to say yes. It's when you start measuring, particularly in what we are, we try to be a global organization. We say we're trying to help kids grow stronger, smarter, and kinder. We do have try to go the earliest years, so there's a bit of a filter. But when you start saying, where am I going to deploy my own, probably no different than a funder has, my own resources, when the return is impact, and you start measuring, is this kid more important than that kid? And it's not as simple as, did you make money? It's much harder. And that is probably, how do you keep your from mission creep? How do you prevent yourself from doing too many things a little bit versus a few things a lot of bit? Once you take away that clear financial return on investment model, it's harder.
Those are the questions that keep you up at night.
Those are the knowing also, as I say, is like when we make a decision. Right now we're funding some work. I'll be transparent. South Africa, we've been there for 10 years and some breakthrough work, great brand relevance, but funding dried up. So we decided, it's too important. There's too much of a need. Same thing with India. We're going to sort of fund it ourselves a bit with the hope we'll prove it and then we'll get funders down the road. That decision, then the next good idea comes in a couple months. Every door you go through, you close another door, and you've made a decision that a South African kid is more needy or deserving than a kid in another country, let alone a much more complicated discussion, kids in our own backyard in the United States. Right. But that's when you don't have the financial filter, it's harder.
It's harder.
And I assume funders go through it every day, and we go through it when we self-fund, or we go through it when we prioritize what we're going to fund against.
Yeah. We have time for one question.
You have 5 extra minutes.
Oh, I have 5 minutes.
That's wrong.
That's wrong. Oh, even better. Good. We have time for a couple of questions. Yay. Does anybody have a question in the audience that they would like to share, or shall we keep this conversation going here? Give you a chance? Okay, right over here. Just stand up, and there you go.
I have power.
If we're squinting, it's because this light.
It's not me.
It's a little bright.
Okay. Benjamin Houston from Waterford. We're also a nonprofit, and one of the things that we do internally to try to kind of grapple with some of the pressures you're talking about wanting to go everywhere at the same time, even though you're trying to run a business and keep the lights on, is we talk about having to earn the right to get to certain things. So we have a certain amount of reach right now, but we're trying to earn the right to maybe get to kids that are more vulnerable in certain circumstances. What are some of the things that you're trying to earn the right to get to at Sesame?
What are we trying to earn the right to get to?
It certainly sounds like some of the South Africa work falls into that category.
Yeah, it's always important to know, is like we started as one of the challenges. This is why, in some ways, we have to be a non-for-profit. Is that our mission is for all kids, but our reason for being is the most vulnerable. Where in Nirvana you can actually reach both which is great, but there is generally no business model around targeting the most vulnerable, children, whether they're in this country or another country. I think the earning it is always like, okay, where do we feel, again, there's things that are self-sustainable, there are things that we think we can fund against, and then there's where we're going to invest and control our own agenda, and that when you get into, where do you feel financially, how many can you do, and where do you feel financially secure enough in a world that various markets funding goes up and down, that you're projecting that this is a 5-year decision and I feel good enough in 5 years. I think that, for us, we've made bets, for example, where South Africa and India is the other one. And I think that right now we're in a fortunate enough situation and have a lot of momentum. I think there's a couple of US things, and going deeper in South Africa and India, where the others, and we're doing great humanitarian work in Syria, now in Bangladesh, and we believe that that's an issue that's not going to go away. We're building up expertise. Latin America and Africa are other places that are underserved, and there are humanitarian lessons that we can bring to the table. And so those are some of the other areas.
Do you see a bigger opportunity to really partner? I mean, we now have many, many nonprofits. There's some funding from the government. Does this kind of drive forward the need to have closer partnerships, whether it's with the government, between nonprofits, or even across the nonprofit, for-profit?
Yeah, one of the other things that kind of the newish regime at the workshop, I have a very simple, we are and also coming from a for-profit side, we believe now incredibly in partnerships. We're a small organization with big ambitions, and so the mandate, the way we look at it is we need to create virtual scale. And we're never going to be able to do everything else. You don't have market forces. I always say if we were a for-profit company, someone would have bought us. Someone would have said, you would have been consolidated, either to scale the brand or to get efficiencies, et cetera. But those market forces, for better or for worse, that's a whole longer kind of conversation, whether they should happen more in the not-for-profit space, don't naturally happen when financial return is not your motivation.
So can you use partnership to sort of drive
So we use
that?
partnership to do it. And we try to say, what are we good at? For us, we've said we are makers of content. Even if we wish, we don't own her, and we need to partner with people to distribute that content and reach people. In Syria, IRC was an example. They're an on-the-ground services organization. That was our foundation. We don't own TV channels. We partner with PBS, HBO. Now we work, with Apple, and then around the world with other people, because we're never going to have that scale and heft to do it. We're in schools. We're with McGraw-Hill. That's our vehicle in. And we only will fulfill our mission if we can galvanize our partners and find partners who are like-minded, incentives are aligned, and can help build our reach and brand. And I think that's imperative for any not-for-profit, because you're never going to have the expertise or scale.
And do you see an opportunity to reach to smaller nonprofits? So those are great examples of reaching up and taking advantage of the scale that others offer.
Yeah.
What about reaching to the rest of the community?
I think I could use this event right here as an example. Matt and his team and Promise and Midi are in a different way. They are Matt's doing something that it would be on our list, but we're never going to have the focus and energy that he and his team are doing. Atlantic Coast, we're more East Coast versus West Coast, so that to us is a perfect example. We're able to scale our knowledge and our impact. And the beauty about being for a not-for-profit is you're not worrying about capturing the asset value. You're worrying about actually having the impact and the reach, because that's how you measure whether you've done your job. And so if you can partner and scale your efforts, and again, this event here is a perfect example of it. Whether it's big or small, their school. You can call her big. Priscilla Chan spoke today. We're partnering with her in the primary school. She's doing the schools. We're doing a piece of the curriculum. There's some similar schools in New York that we're doing that with. A charter school network for preschools and a little bit older. And to us, it's imperative. Once again, you need focus, because partnerships take time.
They do. They do. So last question is, it has been great to see the evolution of the Sesame characters. As you said, Elmo's here and maybe here tomorrow. It's been great to see autistic Muppets. It's been great to see others. 50 years from now, what are we going to say about Sesame Street?
The first is we pray. I'm going to say this, particularly again being on the outside. I try to remind the organization as well, is like, it is not an entitlement to be. There are 3 shows. You got 60 Minutes, Saturday Night Live, and Sesame Street that have been around for 50 years. You got to earn that every single day. It is not an entitlement to believe there's a season 51, let alone a season 52, let alone season 100. And everyone, I say it's entitlement, one also should step back and like sort of pat yourself on the back because, oh my God, that's incredible. I think in 50 years, you have Sesame Street that is still going strong, and we've figured a way to reinvent it and evolve it so it's relevant and connects to people. A lot of the stuff we're doing now, hopefully that sort of continues. In a fragmented world, we're never going to fulfill our mission if we're only about Sesame Street, so we're going well, beyond that. In a multi-touch point world, we're never going to be, we are now much more than a TV show, but you're going to, the Nirvana, I don't know what it is in 50 years, but people don't think of Sesame Street as a TV show. We're in communities, it's a digital experience, and it's whatever next technology, and that we have figured out how to reach the scale and impact in those ways as much as we have in sort of traditional media.
That's wonderful. And making an impact for, as you said, the most vulnerable children.
Yes.
Absolutely. Please join me in thanking Steve.